Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on your time zone. Trust everyone has received the Big 12 conference release announcing last evening's Board of Directors' decision to proceed with plans for the fall sports season. If you have not, please visit big12sports.com. To give insight on the considerations that led to the decision, I would like to introduce Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlsby to provide his thoughts. Following Commissioner Bowlsby's remarks, we will open the lines up for questions. Please be reminded that when asking a question, identify yourself and the outlet you represent. Bob?
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. Apologies to those that have reached out that I have not had an opportunity to get back to. It has been a wild couple of days, and so I regret that I haven't been as available as I would normally like to be. We have spent a week, and really it's a culmination of the last 5 months, trying to ascertain the best path forward. We've done that mostly talking to our student athletes and talking to healthcare professionals and scientists that are working in COVID research and care. We have evolved over time. There isn't any question about that. We're learning more all the time, and yet there's much we don't know. What we do know is that testing is the best way to intersect early after infection, and that we need to do a rigorous testing regimen. We know that there can be complications with this virus, and so positives have to be dealt with very carefully, and follow-up and return to play has to be carefully managed and appropriately diagnosed. And I think what we've heard from our student athletes is they'd like to play, but they want to make sure it's safe. They want to know what the eligibility implications are, and they want to know that their financial aid is secure. And we have made every attempt to answer those things. Some are still in progress as a result of NCAA council considerations, but generally speaking, I think we've been able to make progress and provide information, and I feel very good about where we are at the present time. The board heard from doctors that have comprised our conference medical committee and have advised us over the past months and weeks. We have also assembled on a weekly basis a representative group of doctors and researchers and scientists from each of the A5 conferences, two people from each league, and really a star-studded group with some of the foremost experts in this area in infectious diseases in the entire world. And so we feel like we, through the combination, have gotten good advice. Last evening, we had a team from the University of Kansas that was very helpful in helping the board think through the issues. We also had a representative from the Mayo Clinic that works in genetic cardiology and that provided some very helpful information. And obviously the conversations with student athletes are always very helpful and provide insights that we definitely need. As Bob mentioned, there is a media release out that includes our conference schedule. Each of our schools will be having one more non-conference game. Those opponents will all be expected to adhere to Big 12 testing standards, and that would be the week before they play the game. And so we feel like we're fully as well prepared as we can be at this time to move forward. We plan to do what we have always done, and we've been doing it since April, and that is on the advice of doctors, moving forward slowly, constantly reevaluating what we're doing, making small corrections, and looking for challenges that we, in one way or another, can't meet. And so we have been able to put one foot forward and then follow it with another. And we've gotten to this point. I personally wanted to see us get to this point in August so that we could have a look at what preseason camp looked like and to see what we might have learned to do as we went along. And frankly, we found that what we thought was golden 60 days ago is garbage today. And it's an ever evolving environment, and we will find ourselves with bumpy spots during the fall. There isn't any doubt about that. But I think we're very well prepared to deal with those things. And so I feel good about the decision going forward. I believe our board feels good about it. And I think most importantly, we have some clarity for our coaches and our student athletes. And there's a difference between clarity and certainty. I don't think we have certainty in this environment, but we have been able to get some clarity. So let me stop there, and I'll be happy to address your questions.
As a reminder, to ask a question, press star 1 on your telephone. To withdraw your question, press the pound key. Please stand by while we compile the Q&A roster. Okay, your first question comes from the line of Robert Allen. Sir, please state your outlet and your question.
Yes, Robert Allen with Sports Illustrated Maven and the Oklahoma State Cowboy Radio Network. Commissioner Bowlsby, let me ask you first, how'd the vote go? If there was a vote last night, is this something right now that's somewhat tenuous, or was it more overwhelming that the board of directors wanted to move forward?
We don't ever characterize the discussions or the votes in the room, Robert, but we feel very good about the vote and about the sense of the meeting and the progression to the decision that we got. And so, I don't think it is appropriate to characterize what individuals said or what occurred within the room, but it's easy to say that the board is comfortable with where we are.
One follow-up medically, you've talked a lot about the consultants you've used that the NFL shares at Duke, and I know another Duke epidemiologist, Cameron Wolf, advised the ACC about going forward. What's the latest, and when was the latest you consulted with your group of doctors that are centered out of Duke?
Well, Dr. Chris Hostler is on all of our medical calls, and so he was on last night. He meets with us with great regularity, and Dr. Wolf is one of Dr. Hostler's colleagues at Duke. And he also is one of the representatives that meets with the A5 group. So I've met extensively with Dr. Wolf over the course of the 5 months. He's well known. He's a top infectious disease physician, and as I said, a colleague of our consultant. So he's very, very well respected, and so we're very familiar with him.
Thank you.
Your next question comes from the line of Todd Lebo. Please state your outlet, sir.
Todd Lebo, Sports Radio 810 in Kansas City. Commissioner, I know you mentioned it in your opening remark that what was great news 60 days ago could be garbage today. The Big Ten put their schedule out and then 6 days later canceled the entire thing. I guess what's your confidence level? I know you don't want to say an exact percentage probably, but how good do you feel that this is going to at least get started for your conference?
Well, I feel good about it. It's hard to handicap those kinds of things because, if anybody is around that tells you that they can accurately forecast what's going to happen with the virus, they're delusional. Even the best scientific minds are unable to forecast with precision. But having acknowledged that, I feel good about where we are simply because we have good practices in place. And I think the other thing is during the preseason camp is about as close to a bubble as you're going to get with college students. It's different than professional athletes. You're not going to lock them down in a hotel and sequester them from families and the like. It's just a different task, both in terms of its the intricacies and the scale. We just have a lot more people involved than professional athletes. So the preseason camp where they're all staying together, they're eating together, they're training together, they're in team meetings together. It's important that we do the right things with regard to social distancing and wearing masks and washing hands and disinfecting facilities and the like. But it's also a good environment. And what you're seeing, we had a number of various sized outbreaks when student athletes first returned to campus. Now we have several of our teams that haven't had a positive test in weeks. So, I do think that within the athletics facilities, we can do a really good job. And I think a lot of the success of teams during this season going forward and a lot of how many potholes we fall into has to do with whether or not young people can discipline themselves to not go to parties where there are hundreds of kids in close contact and not be in crowded restaurants and the like. And you can't stop living your life, but you also have to be smart about putting yourself in risky situations.
If I could just quickly follow up, University of Nebraska is a former Big 12 member, and they've expressed yesterday that they wanted to play football. Have you had any contact at all at the conference level with anyone from the University of Nebraska about getting involved in any way? I know you guys already have your schedule out, but did they reach out in any way about playing some football games against Big 12 teams?
They have not.
Your next question comes from the line of Dennis Dodd.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, Dennis. Good morning.
Good morning. Two questions real quick. How important, Bob, is settling the eligibility question right now? I know conferences are going to cover scholarships, but the uncertainty over eligibility right now, how important is that to getting an extra year?
Yeah, I think our advocacy is going to be for just as liberal a treatment of eligibility issues as is possible. The NCAA Council is going to deal with it today and then again next week and make a recommendation to the board of directors. And I expect that we will get some clarity. Now, I think it's probably unrealistic to think that you're going to play 9 games, and if we got disrupted at the very end of the season, that you're going to get a whole year back. But it's probably also in this environment unrealistic to think that the 4-game redshirt rule is necessarily what prevails. And so, that's what young people are wanting to know is, hey, if I start this season and we get 5 games in and we can't play anymore, I've lost the second half of my season. I've lost my postseason. What's my circumstance? If I'm a senior, am I done? Well, those are fair questions, and we have to give them some answers. And I think that there'll be some bright lines drawn, and I think that will give some clarity to it. Relative to the financial aid piece of it, however, all of our schools are completely committed to retaining financial aid for anybody that wants to opt out. And so that they can continue to go to school. So, the safety, eligibility, and financial aid are the 3 areas where student athletes really want want some questions answered, and we're making good progress to do that. And I think they're going to have those answers well before the season starts.
Good. Also, do you expect to play for a berth in the college football playoff, since I think there are 50-something teams playing in the spring now?
Yeah, well, maybe playing in the spring.
Right.
But, I don't know. We have a CFP call next week, and we'll obviously talk about this, but it's gonna be a while into the season before all of that's resolved, Dennis. We just are going to have to wait and see. There probably isn't any obvious reason why it couldn't work to continue to try and play a postseason, but you're also looking at a December-January timeframe that's right in the heart of the virus season. So I just think it's too early. We're going to have to be patient and wait and see what happens before we can answer those questions.
You think it'd be possible to award 2 champions, one in the fall, one in the spring?
Well, I think you'd ask the logical question whether either one of them is actually a champion.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I think that's the question.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, but it's unanswered at this point.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Your next question comes from the line of Ari Temkin. Please state your outlet.
Thank you. It's Ari Temkin from SiriusXM. What was your reaction and the conference's reaction to the decision yesterday for the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and did that influence the decision from the presidents and chancellors of the Big 12 and their vote?
Well, as you know, Ari, we've spent a lot of time with the other conference commissioners, and I think there was some presumption that what that meant was that we were all going to be in lockstep. In the end, I think we all have to do what is best for our individual conferences, and we're not all similarly situated. We have in the case of the Pac-12, they've got a really tough situation in Southern California, and 2 of their flagship schools there, and San Francisco has been a hot spot off and on. So I think each league has to make its own decisions. When they made the decision that they made, certainly it causes us to look at the things that they indicated were drivers for them, and we have to make our own assessments on those same criteria. What we have heard from our experts is that some of the ramifications of the virus can be mitigated and can be properly managed. And as long as that continues to be the case, they believe that we can safely conduct competition and safely conduct practice. If we get to the place where it's their considered opinion that we no longer can do that, then we will be able to pivot very quickly to another course. But I think we can all talk to the same people. We can all look at the same data. We can all look at our own individual circumstances, and we can come to different outcomes. And obviously, that's what's happening.
Just to follow up on the situation with those other conferences, would the Big 12 entertain adding temporary members?
It's not in any of our plans at the present time.
Thank you.
Next up is Randy Peterson. Please state your outlet.
Randy Peterson from the Des Moines Register. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Randy.
How many positive tests would equal not playing a game, whether it be forfeit, cancellation, whatever that would be? Is there a number out there?
No, I don't have a number. We've talked about it. We've talked about trying to identify a 50 to 60 person roster that were considered essential participants. You think about the offensive and defensive line. It's difficult to transition people into those positions on short notice. And so, if you had a bunch of people out in those position groups, you wonder if you could play. But we still are we ask the coaches to talk about that and decide what it would look like. Part of the process is going to be an attestation that is signed by the AD and the team physician or the head doctor that says nobody that's on the field today has tested positive in our most recent series of tests. And so that attestation is going to help us a lot. But institutionally, it may be decided by a number, but it also may be decided by other factors. If all your quarterbacks live together and they're in the same conference room and they all of a sudden are infected, it's hard to go forward. I think it'll also be dependent upon whether or not the game can be rescheduled. Some of them can be rescheduled. Some of them, as we get later in the season, there won't be any opportunity for that. So, it's just another one of those decisions that we'll have to be making in real time.
Bob, one more thing. What was your conversation with the student athletes? Who, can you go through that? Who'd you talk to? I mean, players from each team or how did that happen?
Yeah, it started out as two players from each team. I think some of them might have been designated by their head coach. Some of them were probably appointed by their teammates. Some of them were captains. Some of them were people that had been COVID positive and wondered, had specific questions about their own circumstance. But all 10 institutions were represented. There were a few institutions that had more than two, which was fine. But they're smart, they're insightful, they're tough, they love the game, and they were just very thoughtful. And those three areas that I mentioned came up over and over again. And some of the questions were sort of global questions, and some of them were very specific to an individual. There was one of the young men that had been COVID positive and had returned to activity, but still had not returned to his sense of taste and smell. And ask the question, and we'll likely get the students together again with the doctors. The last call we were on, we spent most of the time on eligibility and financial aid, but we've pledged to schedule another call here in the next few days that will allow them some opportunity to ask specific medical questions and scientific questions.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
Your next question comes from Leo Haggerty.
Yes, Leo Haggerty, It's Sports Magazine, Night Sports Productions. Commissioner, are all the conference schools using the same testing, and what's the turnaround on that time-wise?
The answer is no. They're not all using the same testing. They aren't using the same testing companies and the same labs. They're using the same style of testing. But there also is some latitude in our policy for antigen testing and other kinds of new development testing. And I expect that that's one of the places where we'll see a lot of evolution during the course of the football season. I think there's every indication that testing technology and availability and reliability will continue to improve. And relative to everybody doing the same thing, that gets normalized during the course of the season. I mentioned the attestation that everybody will do, but we'll also get to the point where we likely will be testing on Sunday, Wednesday, and then Friday evening. And so at that point, everybody that's playing that week will be doing the same thing.
My follow-up is a hypothetical. If the ACC and the SEC decides to go to a spring schedule and you're the only one out on the limb, will that affect what you do?
Well, anytime anybody at any level has decided they weren't going to play or that they were going to do something different, it affects us. We consume that information and we homogenize it with the other information that we have. So, I don't know that we would want to be the only college football conference playing. To the questions about the postseason, that pretty much eliminates the postseason. And John Swafford and Greg Sankey and I spend a lot of time together, and we spend a lot of time comparing notes. And I think it's unlikely that we would diverge without some fairly significant conversations in advance of it.
Commissioner, thank you for your time and good luck.
You're welcome, Leo.
Next up, we have Ryan Hennessy.
Hi, Commissioner. Ryan Hennessy, NBC 13 in Birmingham, Alabama. I was wondering if you guys have came to a conclusion about the fans in the stands and if you guys are pushing towards that with the season just a little over a month away.
Yeah, well, as you know, Ryan, that is very much a local issue. We do not have a policy at the conference level. There are states that have said 50%. There are states that have said 25%. There are states that have said they don't think it's a good idea to have any fans in the stands. Fans of college football are a huge part of game day, and so I think we all agree that we're not going to have full stadiums. You think about the challenges of disinfecting a weight room or a training room or a locker room. You can imagine the challenges of disinfecting an entire stadium and then socially distancing. If you socially distanced in the restroom line and put 6 feet between you and everybody else, you'd have a restroom line that was 1.5 miles long. And it's just the practicality of it in today's environment is certainly one component. The other component is I think it's yet unknown what the psychology of public assembly will be. Will people go back and sit cheek by jowl with people they don't know when there's not a vaccine in place? I think that's a really good question that we're gonna have to spend some time on. But I don't think we're going to be anywhere near capacity crowds, and it's going to vary by locale. And those kinds of decisions on public assembly have been made to this point in time, and I think will continue to be made by public health officials and governmental offices, and in the case of football stadiums, university trustees and leadership. But it's not, they're not decisions that are likely to be made at the athletic department level. And because everybody's situation is different, it's unlikely that we will be making that decision at the conference level.
Yes, sir.
Your next question comes from the line of Heather Denise.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can, Heather. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Following up on Dennis's question from earlier, I know that the selection committee members are having their virtual training session, and I was wondering if you have given any thought, which you probably haven't, about the protocol. And I know Bill's talked about it just a little bit about how it might be tweaked, but given all of the non-conference games, everything that's happened, do you guys expect as commissioners to be making any changes to how the 4 best teams are chosen if we get to that point?
Well, it's a great question, Heather, and I think it's possible that those protocols will have to evolve out of necessity. We certainly aren't going to have the intersectional contests, the interleague contests that we have enjoyed in the past. But having said that, there's a lot of subjectivity in it, even under the best of circumstances, and we put 13 honest people in a room and we asked them to do a very difficult job. And so I think actually their task is the same as it's always been. They just don't have as many tools available to them.
On an entirely different note, excuse me, I wanted to ask how much thought, if any, has been given to making mandatory EKGs or some sort of heart tests on each campus this season. I know some schools already have it. I was curious what your thoughts were on that.
Are you talking about for student athletes, Heather, or for regular students?
For student athletes.
Yeah, our policy is that any student who tests positive before they go back to any form of activity are going to have a cardiac MRI, an EKG, an echo, and a troponin test, and that's the standard of care that is required, and that cardiologists mandate, and that will be our case. And there will be some that probably a return to participation is not going to be possible, but we will find that out before they go back to any form of strenuous exercise.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from the line of Brian Smith.
Brian Smith, Houston Chronicle. You mentioned the SEC and the ACC. How much contact are you in terms of speaking with the commissioners, trying to stay on the same page? And it's obviously very complicated and it's conference based, but ultimately it does appear if there's going to be big time college football in the fall, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 have to stick together on some level. How do you try to navigate that as this goes on?
Well, it's been a long time since I haven't spoken with the two commissioners from those two conferences on at least a daily basis. Sometimes it's more frequent than that. Believe it or not, we actually like and respect one another. And other than the fact that we try and beat each other's brains out when we compete, we actually spend a lot more time collaborating than we do anything else. And so we speak very regularly. We share challenges in common, of course, and then we also have been meeting with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 throughout this whole time too. So we spend a lot of time together, and I would say we have the A5 commissioners have spoken daily, at least 6 times a week since the first week in March. So we do a lot of collaboration, and I assume we'll continue to do that.
Your next question comes from the line of Brian Davis.
Hey, Bob. Brian Davis, Office of American Statesman. There's a lot of we've heard from the two other conferences, of the health risks and everything else, and everyone knows all that. Let me be devil's advocate. What is the argument for playing and trying to make this work?
Well, the biggest argument is that nobody has told us that it's poorly advised to go forward and do what we are doing. If we get to the place where our doctors and scientists say, you know what, you guys got 2 wheels off the tracks and you're headed for a train wreck, we will pivot that day. And if it's during camp, it's during camp. If it's during October, it's during October. If it's the week before our championship game, that's when it is. And so making adjustments on the fly are going to be a part of this. But our medical professionals have said, go forward, move slowly, make small adjustments, constantly be vigilant about changes in the environment. And, that's what we're listening to. And they have told us that it's safe to move forward on that basis. When they tell us otherwise, we will be listening to that as well.
I mean, how would you describe, though, with the presidents? I mean, look, these are people who are risk averse by nature, right? I mean, how would you gauge the mood in them when, let's be honest, social media and TV, every single person is trying to tell this group to shut it down?
Well, I don't. I guess I would say, Brian, that for the most part, I have better information, and my presidents have better information than most of our friends in the Fourth Estate. And so, reasonable people can disagree on it, but the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are seeing much of the same information that we're seeing. But our board believes in our scientists and has come to a conclusion that's different, and so have the leadership of the SEC and the ACC. And to your point about being conflict averse, or some are and some are not. In any group of people, you end up with some that have a conservative nature and some have a more aggressive nature. And I would say our league has a combination, and yet they work together very well, and the ADs have worked together very well. And so we believe that the people advising us have our best interests at heart, and we are going to follow their instructions explicitly.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Brent Skarkey.
Bob, this is Brent Skarkey from KFOR, Oklahoma City, NBC. Just from a fan's perspective, will there be a conference-wide policy on tickets if people want, long-time season ticket holders, or is that a school-by-school basis if they don't feel comfortable going, if they want a full refund, if they're only able to go to certain games because of capacity restrictions?
Yeah, no, that's going to be an institutional decision. Those things always are. The only thing that we would get involved in is the provision of tickets for the visiting team. We, as you know, we have a provision for providing for the parents of the visiting team, and so I don't know off the top of my head what the number is. I think it's 500, but that notwithstanding that, the conference doesn't get involved in distribution of regular season game tickets, and those policies reside with the institution. And I haven't reviewed them to see how consistent they are, but these are certainly unusual times, and that the institutions will control those policies.
It's fair to say, though, it's going to be kind of a confusing, like you said, a confusing time for each school, each fan, as we move forward.
Well, I think
as far as tickets,
to my previous comment, the public health officials are going to have a lot to say about what the capacity is, and I think the institution's ticket office is going to have to respond based upon what local authorities are telling them about public assembly.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The next question comes from the line of Lane Higgins.
Hey there. I don't think that said my name right, but I'm Lane Higgins from the Wall Street Journal.
Hi, Lane. Good morning.
Morning. I had a question for you about if there's any sort of thresholds in place. I mean, you've mentioned that the league would be quick to pivot if medical experts say that there is not a reason to go forward. But is there, a set number or percentage of players that would test positive that would cause a game to be moved or cause, a season to be potentially aborted or delayed?
We're still working on that. We've asked the coaches to give us some thoughts on how they might do it, and we've talked to them a couple times, and we haven't come to closure on it. But I mentioned the attestation form that would be part of the pregame requirements, and so I think we'll eventually gravitate to a place where we can there's a lot of different ways to go at it. You can draw bright lines and say, if you got 10 positive tests, you're going to have to forfeit, or it's going to have to be rescheduled. There are ways to draw softer lines than that, and we haven't come to closure on it, but we will before the season starts.
Yeah, and what sort of softer ways of forming a threshold are there? I mean, it seems like it's almost an on and off switch. I don't know how much gray area there is.
I'm sorry, I didn't get all the question, Lane.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you mentioned that you're looking for a softer way to kind of make a decision on whether or not games should go forward, but it seems like that's kind of a binary yes or no decision. I guess, can you explain to me what you see as the gray area there?
Well, as an example, you could draw a bright line and say, if you don't meet this criteria, you forfeit. Well, maybe that's a satisfactory way to do it. On the other hand, you'd say, well, the first thing we're going to do is try and reschedule the game. And if both teams can't reschedule, then, we revert back to some other form of as you said, binary resolution of the matter. Kids want to play, coaches want to coach. We'd like to see a meaningful conference schedule that would include everybody playing everybody, and so that's going to be our first attempt, is to try and get that outcome. But one of the challenges is that, obviously coaches are competitive, and you could see situations where they would game the system if they had the wrong people that were affected in a particular week. But the long and the short of it is, the coaches haven't resolved it, and our athletics directors haven't resolved it, but I'm confident that we will.
And are there any medical experts that are also weighing in on kind of what that threshold might be?
Our medical experts are involved in every decision we're making at every level of this, from what do you do with the chain gang, to how do you disinfect the replay room, to how many people have to have masks on the sidelines. There's 100 little decisions that have to be made, and our medical professionals are involved in all of them.
Got it. Thanks so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
Your next question comes from Jerry DePaula.
Oh, hi. This is Jerry DePaula from the Trib Total Media in Pittsburgh. Commissioner, I was wondering if you could possibly quantify the number of tests your member schools have administered, I don't know, in the past month or so, and how many came back positive. And on an unrelated note, how many, when do you think that, how long will it take for those tests to come back?
Well, to the first question, I don't know how many we've administered, and I don't know how many positives have come back. We don't coordinate that from the conference office, nor do we keep statistics on it. It's available from each of the schools. We don't have a universal standard on how they announce those things, but I think most of ours have not announced individual student athletes, but rather numbers. And recently, our trends have been very positive. We've had declining numbers of positives just as a result of being in more structured environment. But beyond that, I don't have any way to answer that question for you. You'd have to go to the individual institutions.
And one other question, if I may, the student athletes who decide to opt out, who have already redshirted, will they retain the year of eligibility?
That's one of the things that the council will take up. But remember, the opt-out process is removing oneself from all things football. That is not the same thing as redshirting. When you redshirt, you continue to train and you continue to be a part of the team. When you opt out, you remove yourself from participation with the football program, and it is then much more difficult to re-engage. You keep your aid if you want to opt out, but it isn't the same as taking a year off to train.
I got you. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
You're welcome.
Next up is Jenny Carlson.
Hey, Bob. Jenny Carlson with the Oklahoman. We obviously have seen the announcement today of the enhanced protocols and added testing and all of that. But I know that there's still people around the country love college football, and they still say the risk with this virus is still so high. The health problems, getting sick, death. Obviously, we know those numbers are out there too. What would you say to people who see all that you're doing to try to mitigate this, but are still worried about those risks?
Well, I'd say we're worried about them too. We just believe that there are ways to make sure that our student athletes are safe, that they have an array of options, and that we do everything we can to create and provide a safe environment, and that to the extent that we want to make sure that they are no more likely to be exposed and infected by the virus in a sports environment than they are in any other environment in society. We're all at some risk for infection by the virus, but those that do a better job of hand washing and social distancing and wearing masks and doing other things that represent best practices are probably less likely to get it. But I think everyone in our society is concerned at one level or another about getting exposure to the virus, and it's our task and it's the belief of our doctors that we can put our student athletes in a situation where they are less likely to be infected under supervision and surveillance and testing than they would if they were in the general population. Aspirationally, that's where we want to be.
Speaking of the general population, obviously these campuses are, if they haven't already, getting ready to welcome back the general student body. What has been the advice and message from your medical professionals to the teams, to the schools, about just how to handle that influx of people that are going to be around these teams moving forward?
Yeah, well, it's a concern for our team doctors and for all of sports medicine professionals. There's no doubt about it. Where we saw some spikes early in the year was when students came back. You remember in late June when we started coming back to campus to train. We all of a sudden had kids going to pool parties and to bars and to restaurants and to house parties, and we had some fairly substantial outbreaks, and it was consistent nationwide. There were just a lot of positive tests at that time, and it was mostly due to non-training type environments. And so you have to think that when 17 to 22-year-olds come back to campus, there will be a lot of interactivity, and I'm sure coaches are spending a lot of time talking to student athletes about the implications of those interactions. And if you hate to, well, first of all, we're not able to do a true bubble or quarantine or restricted living environments and those kinds of things. You don't do those things with college students, but the coaches and the medical professionals are no doubt talking to them about the risks they take to not only themselves but their teammates and to some extent their season if they put themselves in circumstances where they have increased exposure. And so I think there are campuses that are doing 100% testing. And I heard of one this morning that had done 10,000 tests and they had a 0.6 positive rate. So I think it'll vary from population to population, but the student athletes are going to have to be smart about it, or they will they'll find themselves exposed, and a percentage will get the virus.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
Next up is Drew Davison.
Yeah, Commissioner, it's Drew Davison with the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Just a couple, just nuts and bolts questions for you. The release didn't specify where the championship was. Is your expectation still to play at AT&T Stadium?
Yes, our plan is to play at AT&T. If we move off the 12th, we may have to go to an alternative, but right now we're planning on being at AT&T.
And then, did the conference, was spring football ever discussed or an option? I know some coaches and ADs, weren't too high on the idea, but was that a possibility if the fall wouldn't have worked out?
You mean spring competition?
Yeah, like postponing football to the spring semester.
Yeah. Well, I have never thought that preemptively moving to the spring made a lot of sense. First of all, we hadn't been told that we couldn't play in the fall, and we wanted to move to, as I said, to mid-August to see what the experience was. But beyond that, think back to what March, April, and May were like in our country last year. It's the tail end of the virus season, and I don't think there's a single indication that it could be a better situation in March, April, and May than it is in September, October, November. The other thing is, if you start to play in March, that means you bring the players back and you start preseason camp the last week of January, which is right in the teeth of the virus season. So I think it all sounds good to move it to the spring, but I don't think there's any indication that it's any more certain in the spring than it would be in the fall. Having said that, as a fallback, if we got disrupted or something happened that we couldn't start the season, I think the spring is viable. I just don't think it's a first choice, and I don't think it's something we do preemptively.
Right. Well, and then just one more for you with regards to volleyball and soccer, doing the conference only schedule. I don't know where the D1 stands on the 50%, but do you expect those sports will probably just be playing for conference titles this year and not NCAA championships?
Well, it's my hope that that's not the case. I think they deserve to have a postseason opportunity, and we would probably try and think innovatively if it looked like they were going to lose that postseason opportunity. Right now, both volleyball and soccer are above the 50% threshold by 40 or 50 schools, I think, last I looked. And so I think it'd be a while before they'd be below the threshold. But, those are sports that have very high participation. I think both of them are about 350 schools. And so there are lots of young men and women that are playing soccer and volleyball. So there are a lot of kids that are expecting to have a postseason to play for, and I think the regular season would feel different if they didn't have a postseason to play for. So I think it's my obligation, along with our athletics directors and others, to try and do what we can to optimize the experience that our young people have, and that certainly includes a postseason. So I would be very disappointed if the postseason opportunity went away, but there may be other ways to provide that in this very unusual year.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next up is Billy Witz.
Yeah. Hi, Bob. This is Billy Witz with the New York Times.
Yeah. Hi, Billy.
Hi. I just wanted to go back to what So what you're saying is that whether it's the Big 12 or the ACC or the Big Ten or any of these major conferences, the the medical advisory boards that all these conferences have are looking at the same information?
Well, I can't. I don't know what journals doctors have read or what their academic preparation is on an individual basis. But they're all studying the literature and they're all going through their own experiences. They're all talking to colleagues. They're all exchanging information. The group that we have on the A5 doctors calls every Tuesday night is an extraordinary group of people. Dr. Wolf from Duke, who was mentioned earlier, is on that call. So is the doctor that at the University of Washington that saw the first patients in the Northwest that were affected in the nursing homes. We have Dr. Chris Cradavell at Nebraska, who runs their infectious diseases program and was the site that the first Wuhan patients came to that were returning to the United States. I mean, these are some of the best epidemiologists and immunologists and infectious disease physicians in the country, and they're all collaborating. So they generally are looking at the same information. As I said earlier about presidents, some are more aggressive than others, some are more conservative than others. But the body of evidence, the studies that are out there, the progression of the research and the testing, they mostly have access to the same information.
Is the Big 12 board? Are they giving you? Are they giving the presidents information, and then it's up to the presidents to decide, or are they giving them a recommendation and they're saying, we believe that you should do this because of A, B, C, D?
The presidents listen to what's presented to them. They're listening to their own medical personnel on their own campuses. They're listening to our shared medical personnel. They're listening to our consultants. Many of them are doing their own independent work. As an example, Chancellor Girard at the University of Kansas is a physician himself, and so he brings a wealth of knowledge to consideration. But the presidents and chancellors are they're running big, complex organizations. They're very accustomed to having multiple people provide information to them, and they have to homogenize it and arrive at a position that represents their institution. So that it's really the same process that we apply on other decision-making processes. And our board has been terrific. I hardly spoke during the call last night. It went more than 2 hours, and it was organic discussion with the doctors and the scientists. So these are people that are running big, complex organizations, and they're very good at absorbing information and coming up with appropriate decisions.
Right. Well, let me just ask one last thing. Just with you had mentioned California before as a place that was out of control, and the Pac-12 put out a very lengthy, sort of explanation of how they came to their decision. What were the things that they were looking at? The number one thing they mentioned was the not having things under control in the Pac-12 footprint. Well, Texas, where you have 4 schools, which is as many as the Pac-12 has in California, is in worse shape than California as far as cases per 100,000, which is I think what most medical experts are looking at over a 7 to 14 day span. So how do you I'm having a hard time sort of resolving that seeming conflict of why is it not safe in California and why is it safe to go ahead in Texas?
Well, it
when
may
the kids work there.
It may be safe to go ahead in California, but the state government has shut down an awful lot of what's going on there, and in Texas.
But they've given the okay to go ahead and play football.
Why aren't they playing football then?
Because the Pac-12 commissioners presidents decided that it wasn't safe to do so.
Well, you're going to have to ask them why they came to that conclusion. I can tell you that our board listened to all the materials and came to their own conclusion. And I don't know how much individuals were influenced by colleagues that the presidents all talked to one another nationwide, and I don't know how much they were influenced by a call with a president from the Pac-12 or with a call with the president from the ACC, but they came to their conclusion based upon listening to healthcare professionals, and so I think we can certainly look at the same data and come to different conclusions, and I think that's what's happened.
Okay, thank you. And just yes or no, was there a recommendation that came with from the advisory board, or it sounds like what you're saying they just just talked and gave information, not a recommendation?
We had our physicians advisory committee on, but we also had other specialists on, and it was a free flow. There were a couple of presentations, and then it was a free flowing discussion on the various elements.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next question comes from the line of Quirin Imig.
Yeah, hey, Bob. It's Garen Emig from the Tulsa World. In reference to the report that the Pac-12 Medical Advisory Board put out for explaining in 12-page detail the reasons for not proceeding, why not release something similar on the Big 12's end, explaining the reasons for doing so, if nothing else, as a public service, to get not just to give your athletes and your schools a better idea and us on the call of the media, this is a public service.
Well, if we got to the point where we were going to not play, it probably requires more of an explanation. The decision to continue to move forward and stay the course, I think, is a different one. And so I guess you could ask one of the doctors what their thoughts are on that, but we weren't compelled to do that. We thought our task was largely to come to a decision, and the board does that in their own manner. And as I said, they're used to consuming lots of information from disparate sources and coming to their own position representing their institution. I think that's what they did. And had they wanted us to put out a document, I mean, we could have put out the document, that the shared A5 document, but that wasn't what came out of the meeting. That maybe it will out of some future meeting.
Yeah, but would you agree that any information and decisions related to information, particularly related to the number of student athletes who will be proceeding with football, the reasons for playing are just as compelling as reasons not to do so? Is that a fair statement?
No, I don't think it is a fair statement. I think we are moving forward with the status quo, and releasing the schedule is the next step in that process. And if we decide at some point in time that a course correction is required, then it would be appropriate to explain why we thought that playing football in the fall wasn't the right thing to do. so far, what we've been advised is that it's fine to go forward and do what we've done in other falls, except this year we just need to take precautions to coexist with the virus.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
And our last question of the day will come from the line of Barry Trammell.
Yeah, Bob. With three of you left playing in the fall, what do you foresee happening if one of you decides to forego the season here in the next month? Can you see moving forward with only two of you playing, or are you three sort of in it together now, do you think?
Well, I think de facto we're in it together, but I don't know that we're locked at the hips. As I said earlier, I think we'll probably continue to talk with one another with regularity and probably influence one another in terms of how we're managing. But in the end, we have to do what's right for the Big 12, and they have to do what's right for their team. And so, I'm not going to get into the hypotheticals of it because I don't know that it's productive at this point. But anytime something happens in another conference, we're going to take note of that. And in the case of the ACC and the SEC, I think we'll probably know about it in advance and have a chance to compare notes.
When yesterday, before you guys met, you say you're talking with your colleagues at the SEC and ACC. If the Big 12 decided to go another way, were you led to believe the ACC and SEC would move forward with what they're doing, or could they have been influenced by your decision last night?
You'll have to ask them that, Barry. I don't know to what extent they would have been influenced by that.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's conference call. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.